So 3 of the most common questions I get on my How to Use Fish Finder series. First of all, how do I get the clearest image I possibly can? Second, what's the difference between the Garmin GT54 transducer and the GT56 transducer? And third, should I upgrade from the GT54 to the GT56? Is it worth the money? I'm going to answer those questions in this video right now. So first, when we're talking about how to get a very clear picture, it all starts with the connection from the battery. All my screens have a single battery that they're connected to. I'm not connecting to a starting battery of any kind. I'm actually have a single house battery that's different from my trolling motor batteries. Now, I understand in some boats you can only have 1, maybe 2 batteries, but if you can get maybe a smaller lithium battery to connect to any of your sonar units, just to give it a clean connection, that's going to benefit greatly from reducing any interference that a starting motor that might have or a trolling motor might have when it comes to side view, down view, or clear view. The second thing that can kind of help you is just kind of go through your settings. So on this, typically I run my brightness on my Garmin units medium to medium low, depending on if there's a lot of silt or dirtiness in the water. The second, the contrast I usually bump down from default. Usually 40 to 45%. Is going to give you a pretty good image. As far as frequency goes, I'm going to set it on the highest frequency I can when it comes to side view. When it comes to clear view mode, you can set it on the same setting. If you're running a split screen, there can possibly be some interference if you're running, let's say, 1.1 megahertz side view, 1.1 megahertz down view. Some people suggest 2 different frequencies when you're trying to run a split screen. Personally, I haven't seen much of a difference. As far as range goes, what you're trying to do is fit the data that you're actually trying to see on the lake bottom. You're not trying to cram everything left and right of you. Typically, I run a 70 feet left and right. It's going to show me basically any schools of fish, any type of log, rock pile. As you can see here, there are some fish kind of set up on the bottom. That's a pretty big fish right there. What you'll notice here is the difference between this darker side and the brighter side. What happened was I actually drove through a different section of the river that didn't have a lot of pollen in it. And then all of a sudden I hit this pocket where the wind is pushing all this pollen in. I just came around this little rock point, and now all of a sudden there's a ton of pollen, which really clutters up the screen. What you can do to kind of reduce that, you can push the contrast down a little bit. You typically don't want to turn it down too much, but if I bump it down to like the low 30s, it'll clear it up just enough to really start seeing separation between suspended fish, like there's a bunch of suspended fish, and the actual pollen or whatever silt or mud that's kind of floating through that system at that day. So the main thing with clear image, yeah, you can play around with your settings. I usually try to start at the default setting and then bump it a little bit lower to try to clear up the picture a little bit, but the main way you get a clear image is a clean electrical connection from a sole battery, like a house directly connected to your sonar units. You don't want any interference from the outboard motor that's running or from the trolling motor if it's running. So a couple other things you can do to get a clean image on your screen that don't have to do with settings or the electrical connections. Drive in a straight line. Try to drive at speeds or idle at speeds of 1 to 4 miles an hour. That's going to give you the clearest image and not the most distorted image. Anything slower than 1 mile an hour, you're going to start to get distorted images. Fish are going to get stretched out, just the picture of it. So try to drive between 1 to 4 miles an hour, or if you're in a kayak or canoe, try to paddle at least 1+ mile an hour. And I understand, like right now I got some bigger boats on the river today, moving some wake. Your transducer is going to bounce up and down, and you'll see that on side imaging kind of as I go around here, little waves right on the sand bottom here. And that's just your transducer bouncing up and down. But if you can drive in a straight line, drive at a consistent speed, 1 to 4 miles an hour, you're going to get a pretty good image without really touching much of the settings, even if you're just running default settings. So the second question, what is the difference between the GT54 and the GT56 transducer? The GT54 transducer is kind of the generation before the GT56. The cool thing about the GT54 transducer, a lot of times you can get into a lot of these bundles that Garmin sells for fairly cheap relative to the GT56. The price difference, the GT54 comes in at $370 versus the GT56 at $475. Now this is just if you were to buy the transducer by itself. As far as the main difference between the GT54 and GT56 when it comes to actual frequency, both units can run 1.1 or 1.2 megahertz when it comes to side view, side imaging. But when it comes to the clear view, that's what separates them. The GT56 will offer a 1.1 megahertz frequency, Ultra HD frequency for clear view or down view, whereas the GT54 only offers 800 kilohertz for their clear view. Now, me personally, I don't use clear view a lot. If you do, maybe that might be worth an upgrade. Having 800 kilohertz is still going to give you a pretty darn good image. Even using 455 kilohertz on clear view mode, it's actually going to give you a pretty good image. I'm going to go through a couple different sections of this river, some rocks, possibly some weed beds here, a bunch of sandbars, and kind of show you the difference between the GT54 and the GT56. All right, on the screen here, I've actually have this connected kind of like a screen sharing setup with my unit at the bow of the boat. The transducer's mounted on the trolling motor. And I currently have this set to 455 kilohertz simply because the screen at the bow of the boat can't run 800. It can either run 455 or nothing, unfortunately. But I just kind of want to show you the difference of a GT54 transducer, 455, 800 kilohertz. I'm actually going to set it to the 1.2 here in a second. But even with 455 kilohertz, you can still see a very clear definition of the bottom. I kind of got through a section there with a lot of waves that was pushing a lot of pollen, but you can see now this part of the river starting to clear up the black area beneath the boat. The main difference when it comes to 455, 800 or 1.1 megahertz, kind of the beam angle, I've had it interpreted as from an engineer that said, think about it, as you increase your frequency, you're actually taking more pictures of the side of your, like the lake bottom or the river bottom, and kind of to the sides, which gives kind of a crisper image. You're taking more pictures per second. That's the way an engineer kind of explained it to me. There's another, I don't know if that's you can see all these bright spots and the shadows. There's a bunch of fish on the bottom. That I think is a big fish. On 455, it's a little blurry, but you can definitely tell there's something down there. And then you can tell there's fish all along the bottom here, because you can see I'm rocking back and forth because of the waves, and you can see these kind of like little, they look like little lines, almost like I don't know, some sort of waffle line, but that's just the boat rocking back and forth from the waves and the transducer bouncing back and forth. Now we're going to start to get into some weed beds. You can see off to the right side of the screen, this is what some weed beds start to look like. We're starting to get into less than 10 feet of water. There's pockets of weed beds over here, and there's some big fish around it, you can tell. But even with 455 kilohertz, if you're running a GT54 transducer, you still get an image that's good enough. You can actually see fish, you can see weed beds, you can see stumps, rock piles, stuff like that. I'm going to circle back around. I'm going to turn this up to, I'm actually going to run 800 kilohertz on the GT56 just to kind of show you the difference in frequency. Now I'm going to run about that 800 kilohertz frequency, which would be the second highest on the GT54. Again, both units, side imaging wise, they can run up to 1.1, 1.2 megahertz. The big difference is the down imaging. I need to change this down a touch. Here's a school of fish right there in the shallows. And then we just went over a dock, really small pilings. You see these shadows that look like lines right there? Those are the dock pilings that we just went past. There might be a couple fish under there. We're gonna go back out and I'm gonna scan over this boat just so you guys get a picture of the 810. And then we're actually, once I get the boat on side imaging, I'm gonna go over with clear view to really show you the difference between 800 kilohertz clear view versus 1.1 megahertz clear view. Personally, I don't think it's much of a difference, but for those that want to see it, I'll show it to you. Yeah, and you can clearly see there's big tree, big laydowns. There's some fish suspended right there off the right of my boat, some big fish, probably some trash fish. All right. Oh, there's a big school of fish right there. But there is our sunken boat. It's a little like 14-foot aluminum boat right there on the bottom. So I'm going to circle back over with clear view, kind of show you the difference on 800 kilohertz versus 1.1 megahertz. All right, so we're going to circle back around. Right now I have it set on the 840 kilohertz for the GT54 transducer at the bow of the boat. And I'm going to try to go right back over that sunken boat See if we can get you a pretty good image of that. But as you can see, the 840 still gives a really good crisp clear view mode. You can tell there's some fish suspended off the bottom. There's fish suspended way up in the water column there. And I believe that's it right there. It's kind of a weird angle, but that is the boat. You can kind of see the bow of the boat's kind of sticking up, and then the stern of the boat is way down in the gold area right there. You can kind of see there's little seats with the shadows. You can kind of see the bench seats on it. But even with 840 kilohertz out of the GT54 transducer, this is really good clear screen. I'm going to go circle back over it with the GT56 set on the 1.1, and we'll kind of show you the difference there. All right, we should be coming up over the boat right now. I got it set on the GT56 1.1 megahertz, the Ultra HD setting. And I should be close. Did I miss it to the right? Nope, there it is, and there's some fish on it. Now, I will say, driving over at different angles, you're gonna get a little bit different of an image. There's clearly some fish stacked above it. There probably are some crappie, actually. I'm gonna try to circle back and try to catch them. But the GT56 with the 1.1 megahertz, I think the image is a little bit crisper, but is it enough to justify upgrading if you already own the GT54 transducer? Personally, I don't think so. I just don't use a ton of clear view. If you are somebody that uses clear view mode or down view a lot, then maybe it is worth it for you. The one thing I will say, the GT54s, when they come in bundles, you can get a pretty good discount on them. I would not shy away from spending a little bit extra money getting the GT56 with a bundle. Typically, you can save a little bit of money when you bundle it up with a sonar unit. Even the Echo Map units, which are great units. I used to have those on my old boat. Phenomenal units for just like a basic package, probably the most economical unit that Garmin sells. I would not shy away from getting a GT56 as a bundle. If you're buying it separately, if you really use a lot of clear view mode, I'd say go for it. If not, the 840 kilohertz for GT54 transducer should be plenty enough to go find some fish, find some rock piles, whatever you need to do. Appreciate you watching. If you got any comments or questions, post them in the comment section below. Otherwise, you can message me on either Facebook or Instagram. I always appreciate hearing from you. We'll see you in the next one.